Hi, I'm Norm Abram, and welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. You know, it's hard to imagine a more useful tool for the carpenter than sawhorses. And this design has evolved over years of on-the-job use. We'll build these today, but the main event has also evolved over the years, a picnic table. Now I'd like to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the instructions that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools safely will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. But remember this, there is no more important rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now I'll show you how we built our projects. Well, here's one of the pieces of stock for the picnic table. And note what I set it on, a couple sawhorses. And I thought we might have enough time in the program today to show you how to build some. Now there are as many sawhorses as there are carpenters. They're the carpenter's best friend. We've got quite a collection here at the shop, and I want to show you some of the different versions we've accumulated over the years. Here's one that came from a project we did down in Santa Fe. We picked it up at the local home center, and it's definitely Southwestern. Look at this nice little step detail, sort of a typical architectural detail. This one's been around the shop for a while. We don't know who built it, but it's made out of plywood, furring strips, nice wide top, but somebody set the circular saw too deep and cut right through it. But even at that, it still won't die. Look at this, a nice little sort of miniature version of a sawhorse. Now when it comes to building a sawhorse, there are several things that I think are important to make it work well. And the first thing is the height. After all, it is a sawhorse and I want to be able to saw on it. I want to be able to put my leg up on it to hold the work, use my circular saw or my hand saw. If it's too high, it's very uncomfortable, as well as if it's too low. I want it to be strong, yet lightweight. So I use just boards to put it together with plywood to brace the legs so that they won't flop back and forth. And it eliminates the need for bracing, which makes it impossible to stack them. Now I've built dozens of this style. Occasionally I added an embellishment, which was this tool shelf, a place to store nails, the chalk line, or your square. It also functions well as a step ladder. You can step up on the tray, and that allows you to reach some of those higher places. Let's see if we can put a couple together. Now this is a piece of 2x6 for the top, and it's a classic length, 36 inches. And the width is sufficient to safely support narrow pieces of stock. Now the next step is to bevel both edges of the top piece, and that angle is 15 degrees. So the first thing to do is tilt my saw blade on the table saw, and then move my rip fence over to 5.5 inches. And what I'm going to do is run one edge through, turn it end for end, and run the other edge through. The legs for our sawhorses start out as 1x6 spruce boards. Now, spruce is a pretty strong wood, and it's pretty inexpensive. It's available at most home centers. I've beveled the bottom edge of the leg at 15 degrees. I've also beveled the top, and that matches the angle of the piece that connects the pairs of legs. I'll cut the legs over here on the radial arm saw, and I've tilted the unit so that that is at 15 degrees. And all I have to do is cut 4 pieces for each sawhorse. On this style sawhorse, there are 2 gussets on each pair of legs. And what they do is hold the legs together and provide support for the top piece. They're made out of plywood, any old scrap that I happen to have around the shop, as long as it's a 1/2 inch or thicker. I start out with a strip 8 inches wide. I've turned the arm on my radial to 15 degrees, And I put a pencil mark down here to indicate the right length, which is about 11 1/4 inches. So I'll just cut my pieces. Now I'm ready for some assembly. Before I attach the legs, I'm going to lay out where I want them to be, and that's about 1 inch in from the end, which happens to be the thickness of my little combination square. So we'll just put a pencil mark on each end. Apply a little bit of construction adhesive to help reinforce the joint. And what I'll do is pre-drill and then attach the leg with drywall screws. A little bit of construction adhesive where the gusset meets the legs, and those get attached with some more drywall screws. Well, I think you'll agree, that's pretty simple. Now, if you're going to add the shelf, you start out with the same basic sawhorse, the same top and the same legs. But you need to add a few more pieces. One is this rail, which adds support to the shelf. And the other is a slightly longer gusset with a dado to also add support to the shelf. Now, I've set up my table saw with my dado head cutter for a 5/8 width and a 1/4 inch depth, and I'll make the dado in the gusset. Okay, what I've done now is just tilted my dado head to 15 degrees and run a groove along the inside of the rail to help support the shelf. Now what I've actually done here is run the piece through the saw blade to bevel the top so that it'll be flat with the shelf. Now we'll just fit the shelf into the dados we cut, which I've filled with a little bit of construction adhesive, and we may need just a little bit of persuasion. Every well-equipped workshop needs at least a pair of these. I know we couldn't get along without them. Now let's get started on that picnic table. Well, over the years, I've had an opportunity to sit and study a variety of different styles of picnic tables. And I think our prototype takes into account some of the best features that I've seen. This piece of pressure-treated 2x6 is for the legs. I learned the hard way on my first picnic table that the legs are what goes first. They rot out. With this material, it'll last forever. Now, for the top and for the bench, I'm using spruce. I don't use pressure-treated because I don't like the idea of food coming in contact with treated lumber. Now this spruce is really just framing lumber. It's inexpensive, it's light, and I can tell you from personal experience that after you finish the table, if you put a couple coats of stain on it, then stain it every 4 or 5 years, it'll last for 20 years. Now we'll start today by making the legs. They're angled at the bottom and at the top at a 20-degree angle. The measurement from the short point to the long point is 30 inches. And we'll cut those over on the radial arm. First, I'll cut the 20-degree angle on the end of the piece. Now I'll just use this first piece that I cut as a pattern, cut the other 3 legs. The next piece to cut is this 4x4. In most tables that I've seen, you would see a 2x6 or a 2x8 just simply bolted on the inside of the leg. The problem with that is the strength comes from the bolts alone. By using a 4x4, you get a good thick piece running through, and you can let your leg into it, creating an interlocking joint, which makes it real strong. Now, the overall length of the piece is 67 inches, and I've beveled the end at 20 degrees so you won't catch yourself on it. Before I make any changes to the radial arm setup, I want to cut 3 pieces of 2x4. This piece, the one in the middle, and one up here. They join the legs together and they hold all the top pieces of the table. The end is beveled at a 20-degree angle, and its length is 34 1/4 inches. The next step is to remove the material from the cleat and from the 4x4 necessary to set the leg in. Now, it's a deep dado. I can't remove 1.5 inches all at once. It's kind of dangerous. So I'll make it in 2 passes. I've set up a stacked dado head cutter in my radial arm at about 5/8 of an inch width, and I'll just take my time and make all the cuts. Now, I'll finish deepening that dado in a minute, but before that I want to cut the opposing angle, and to do that I have to turn my radial arm so that it's on the other side of 0 by 20 degrees. Now, before I remove the dado head cutter, I want to make one more dado in the 4x4, and that's to receive this brace, which is part of the center support system. Okay, now with one of the leg sub-assemblies fitted together, I'm going to secure each joint with one 8-penny finish nail. And that'll hold everything in position while I drill holes for the bolts. Now, to make the permanent connections at all the joints, I'm going to use some carriage bolts. But I've sat at too many tables where the bolts stick by and you could scrape your leg. So to recess the nut and the washer, I'm going to make what's known as a counterbore. Now, a counterbore is best made with a Forstner bit, and because of its shape, it cuts a nice flat bottom hole, and it cuts through wood like butter. Okay, now I can switch to a 3/8 inch diameter bit and drill a hole all the way through for the bolt. Now, Now the bolts that I'm using are just 3/8 inch diameter, 3.5 inch long, zinc plated carriage bolts. Well, that's not going to go anywhere. I just cut all the pieces that I'm going to need for the top and the 2 bench planks. And if you were lucky enough to get good quality lumber, you could go right to the assembly from here. But you know me, I got the tools and I got the time. And I'd like to have a smoother surface to start out with for the top. So I'm going to run each board through my thickness planer, planing one side, the face side, nice and smooth. Now, if you don't happen to have a surface planer to give you a nice smooth surface, you could always belt sand the top just before you put the finish on. Now, with all the boards for the top face side down on my sawhorses, I'm going to put a clamp on each end just to squeeze the boards tightly together. And then I'll be ready to fasten the leg subassemblies. Now, inevitably, these boards are going to cup and curl a little bit. So I'm using a little construction adhesive to help the screws along and holding it down. Maybe they won't cup so badly. Okay, now we'll take the subassembly and place it on the adhesive, get it lined up. Now pre-drill for some screws. Now the screws I'm using are 2.5 inch bugle head screws, and they're galvanized. And what I'm trying to do here is get 3 screws in each board. And now the center cleat, some more construction adhesive and screws, just like the others. Let's take another look at the prototype. Underneath, there's a brace that runs from the legs to stabilize them up to the center of the table to add some support there. And it has a couple angle cuts on each end. I'll make those at the radial arm. This layout is for the angle that meets the 4x4, and it's 35 degrees. And this is the layout where it meets the 2x4 in the center of the table, and that's also 35 degrees. Okay, now that's the other piece, the other brace. And now what I have to do is turn my radial arm back to 90 degrees. And by placing the angled side of the piece against the rip fence, I can make the cut that's 90 degrees to the angled cut. That fits pretty good. Now to secure the brace to the 4x4, I'm going to use a lag bolt, a 4-inch lag bolt. And I want to countersink the head, so I'm going to start with an 1.25 inch counterbore. Now I'll drill a hole with a 3/8 inch bit for the unthreaded portion of the bolt. And now a pilot hole with a 1/4 inch size for the threaded portion. Now I'll just use a socket and fasten it down. Okay, now for a couple screws down at the center brace. Now for the seats. Now first, a little bit of construction adhesive to hold them down. And what I'm going to do is first tack the seat in place. Now a pilot hole and countersink. And I think that these 3 screws will hold it just fine. Okay, well now all that's left to do is round over all the edges with a 1/2 inch round over bit. Well, those were a couple fun projects to build. And now I guess I better think about a couple coats of stain for the picnic table. Now for a finish on my picnic table, I'm just using a good quality oil stain. I'm putting it on with a bristle brush, and I'm just going to let it soak in. I'm not going to rub it off, and I want to make sure that I cover all surfaces. Well, I'm not sure which of these projects, the sawhorses or the picnic table, will get the most use, but one thing is for sure, they'll last for years.